weekly Bill Kelly podcast live stream, and we're so glad to be with you and to get your input into a lot of the stuff that we've been talking about on the podcast over the last couple of weeks. Right at the top of the list, though, is what's going on with our Prime Minister. Prime Minister Mark Carney is in China, got there earlier today, and the question we want to talk about is about this trip. And my question to you is simply, is this trip to China by Prime Minister Carney a gamble that Canada has to take? Now, I'm putting it, phrasing it in that manner because there are some people that say, "Come on, this is an authoritarian government. China, come on, human rights violations. You can't trust them, and they've been trying to rig our elections. I mean, they're bad actors. A lot of them are bad actors. Do you really want to get involved with them?" Well, speaking of bad actors, what about the guy in the White House? So here we are in the middle. Canada has to make some decisions about this. As I've said on the podcast, I'm all for this. I think this is something that absolutely has to happen. But you got to go into it with our eyes wide open. And I think the Prime Minister is aware of that. He's not naive. So we need to be cognizant of some of the shortfalls here. But at the same time, we're in a circumstance right now where, as we've stated on the podcast so many times, the big partner that we've relied on for generations and generations for military support, for economic support, the back and forth, the trade deals, the auto pacts, things of that nature, is gone. Donald Trump is crushing all of that stuff, and we can't allow that to be a void, which is why Carney's over there right now. This was at the invitation of the Chinese government. I think this is something that we absolutely have to do. Your thoughts on this as we continue with our live stream podcast here. Adam, first of all, Adam, thank you for being with us. Says, I'm all for business with China. I think we have to be. I really do. I think you've hit the nail on the head here. This is not, we're not going to be BFFs here. We understand what's going on, but we've had relationships with the Chinese government economically for years, generations. Anne-Marie Carrerio. Hi, Anne-Marie. Good to have you with us on the podcast. Says, yes, Carney needs to do this, and I wish him luck. Yeah, we've all got our fingers crossed, hoping that things are going to work out here. We know about the tariff situation, the canola, the pork tariffs that have been put on here, and that's going to be part of the negotiations, surely. Jane Macno, hi, Jane, welcome to the show. Good to have you with us here. This says this will be good for Canada. I like the idea of this, and you're absolutely right. I guess, as they always say, the devil's going to be in the details here, exactly what sort of a deal is going to be struck here. Alan Ganner says, Bill, he's the only man I would trust to open the doors in China. Can't wait for EAU and India. And those discussions, that's a good point, Alan, because we already know that the Prime Minister has already started opening those doors again. He's talked to Modi in India, and I don't know if there's a trip in store for the Prime Minister to India, but I know they've talked about trade, and they're interested in dealing with Canada. Nancy Daigle, hi, Nancy, good to have you with us today, says, I trust China way more than I do the U.S. That's the circumstance, isn't it? That's that we're looking for right now. It's look at this is the relationship we had, but as Carney has told us right from the get-go, that relationship with the United States is gone, and it's not coming back. Even if Trump leaves, it's not coming back. John says, hey, maybe Canada can make a deal regarding a set of tonnage for rare earths for electric car parts and tech transfer. Funny you should mention that. Good point. What about the EVs? And what about the tariffs, the 100% tariffs that we put on Chinese EVs? And we did that, by the way, because America did it. Are we at that point right now where we don't have to do it just because the Americans did it, the Americans did it? Do we have to carve our own path here? Because that's one of the contentious points. As soon as we put that tariff on the EVs, that's when the tariffs on canola and pork went into effect. And China seems to think, okay, you drop yours and we'll see what we can do about dropping ours. Hi, David. Good to have you with us here. Says, let me get Chantel up here first. Okay, back to David. The USA is too unstable for anything. Yes, increasing trade with China is absolutely good. Hi, David. Good to have you with us on the podcast today. Here's Chantel. Let's take the lesser of two evils. And that's the point, Chantel. Good point. You've got to balance these things. We still trade with China. We still have to trade with China. I want to reference a piece here, Chantel, just before I go on with a lot of the other comments that are coming in here. Lawrence Martin, who writes for the Globe and Mail and has for 1,000 years, one of my favorite political commentators. And in the interest of full disclosure here, Lawrence's family and our family grew up in the East Mountain of Hamilton, about 5 houses from each other. I didn't know him because he was the older guy. I hung out with his younger brother, but he's a great writer. And he writes about this and says, look, we don't have any choice. The United States is not just abandoning us, they're screwing us left and right. And they're going to do that later on this year when they start having these negotiations with Kuzma. Well, there's not going to be any negotiation. We know that. So we got to do something about this. Essentials, hi, good to have you with us today. U.S. Trade Minister still says they need nothing from Canada, so we have to trade somewhere. Trump says they don't need anything from Canada. He said that again today. You'd think, okay, get rid of the bombast and maybe we can have a pragmatic approach to this. He doesn't want to. He's reiterating and reemphasizing all this crap that he's talking about. Hi, Sandra. Good to have you with us. Says, yes, this is something we as Canadians need to support. Even Michael Kovrig supports this. Michael, of course, is one of the two Michaels that was incarcerated for, almost 3 years, a few years ago by the Chinese government. And that, again, was in response to the fact that we arrested the Huawei representative in Vancouver at the request of the American government. Seems every time we try to do the Americans work for them, we end up getting dumped on as a result, and that's certainly what happened with the Chinese government. Pauline McKenna, hi, Pauline, good to have you here. It says, the farther we get away from anything with the U.S., the better Canada is going to be. Just my opinion. I don't think it is just your opinion, Pauline. I think a lot of people are feeling that way, too. Chantel's back in, says, take the Chinese, ditch the Tesla. Good point. EVs are still in the future. And Prime Minister Carney and Premier Doug Ford in Ontario just signed a deal a couple of weeks ago, an infrastructure deal to try to move along the extraction of those precious minerals in northern Ontario, because we need those for EV batteries and so many other things, too. People still want to buy EVs. I think they're still interested in them. They're just too damned expensive here, because there's only a few people making them. Now I know some of the big three, the traditional automakers are into them right now, and that's great. I'm never going to drive a Tesla. I've mentioned that on the podcast before. Elon Musk, well, don't get me started on Elon Musk. Anyway, hi, Eve. Bonjour. Good to have you with us. The big three auto is a dying industry. We need to pivot. Well, that's part of their own problem. And yeah, we do need to look at other markets. And China is one of these. Now, we're told, I'm not a technological expert when it comes to EVs and automobiles, but we're told this is a pretty good vehicle. There are some downsides and some concerns about these, and that's one of the things I think that we have to do when I said we have to go in with our eyes wide open. And that is I think, what the Prime Minister is talking about. Hi, Violet. Trump says he needs nothing in trade, probably because he intends to take. He's not spreading his military and budget way too thin, not just bankrupting it. He's destroying it forever, like, bye-bye. Yeah, this guy's not a military genius. He is not an economic genius. I don't care what they say about he's the deal maker. He's screwed up just about everything he's touched. And now, how many bankruptcies has he had with his own businesses? Now he's bankrupting the country. People, open your eyes down south of the border. We love you, Americans. We do. And I still can't understand why you voted for this guy, but you better do something about it. Hey, Canadian Pixie, good to have you with us today. Says we need those EVs too. After the Ford plant, the Ford plant where the Trump speech and called, and that's the talking. He's doubling down on all this stuff, and we need to say, well, look, we're going to do this on our own. You're going to dump us on the auto pact, and first of all, the stuff he's talking about he wants all the vehicles made in North America in the United States. So that's not going to happen. He says we have all the raw materials we need. No, he doesn't. He's so ignorant about all of these things. But that's their problem. That we'll have to deal with the consequences, and that's what the Prime Minister is in China for right now. Camrick, hi Camrick, good to have you with us. 45 said he didn't need Canada oil because he thought he could replace it with Venezuelan oil. That's not going to work. Yeah, we did a great podcast on that just a couple of days ago. So we'd ask you to go back in the archives like 2 or 3 days rather, and check out that podcast. And it's a very enlightening podcast about the oil situation and what Trump thinks he got and what's he actually getting out of this. And it's two different things. It's rather fascinating to put that in perspective for you. And it's only one of the many things that are kind of interwoven into this whole discussion, aren't they? Hey, Alan, good to have you with us today. Guilt by association. Canada needs to stop associating with America. Carney has my support until he F's up. Then at least Canada has the rule of law and consequential for action. I'm hoping he doesn't F up. He seems to be a pretty smart guy. He's got a lot more business acumen and a lot more experience when it comes to dealing in international circles than the guy in the White House. And that's got to hold us in pretty good stead, I think, as we go through this process, not just with China, but with other countries, too. This is going to be a very important year for Canada. Hi, Nancy, back with you with what is up with Doug Ford saying to cross the border and visit. I don't know what's going on with Mr. Ford. He's great on bombast. and I know he's very popular here in the province of Ontario right now, but I think some serious questions about some of the policies and some of the things that he says. And Adam just agrees with us, says Doug Ford gets confused sometimes, hence he's sending us down south. Well, we're not going, okay? Americans, sorry, we're going to do what we're doing, or I guess more to the point, not do what we used to do, i.e. visit the States, because I'm sorry, we don't trust your government anymore. Not you. It's not you. It's your government that are doing all this. And I wouldn't go down there again. And I know so many other people that just said, forget it. But the story today, I'm sure you saw in the news, a lot of these snowbirds, that have properties down there are selling them now. They don't want to go back anymore. Hey, Larkin, make the Chinese EVs in Canada, then sell the better product to the U.S. I like that. Now, I don't know if the Chinese are going to be game for that, but it's been broached before. It has, hey, look why don't we manufacture them here? And I've got a theory about that, too, that I'll get to in a couple of seconds. That's a very good point. Thanks for bringing that into the discussion, because I think that's certainly one of the things that the Prime Minister is going to talk about with the Chinese officials, because it can happen. And there's a precedent for this in history, too. We got a second? Let me do this right now, okay? There was a lot of resentment when the Japanese automakers started to push their stuff over here. It goes back to the 1980s, and we heard the same thing from the big three in Detroit. They're going to kill us, we're going to go out of business. Well, when it did, it made them get smarter because the Japanese were doing it better, more efficiently, and built some pretty darn good vehicles. So what did they do? Well, the U.S. government, Reagan, I think, was the president then, simply said, okay, you can do that, but there's still going to be tariffs, but if you build them in here, there's no tariff. And we could do the same thing with the Chinese. Yeah, we'll reduce the tariffs. We're not going to eliminate them. But if you build your cars, your Chinese EVs here, put a plant or two in Canada, there's no tariff then. And that's an incentive for them to do it. And of course, the Japanese automakers jumped at that opportunity. And look, there's factories all over the place with the Japanese auto parts. The other element of, too, is to put quotas on it. That's a business deal and an economic deal. But it's doable. And it's one of the ways that you can control that so the market doesn't get flooded. So where there's a will, there's a way. So what we're trying to find out now over the next couple of days, is there a will on both sides to make something like this happen? I'd like to think there is. So it's this very, very pivotal time to see what's going to be happening here in the next little while. And we don't know yet. I mean, as we do the podcast here today, on Wednesday evening, we don't know what discussions are ongoing right now, and we're told that, manage your expectations. Canadian Pixie, hey, good to have you with us. We want the EVs after Trump's Ford Planet speech for Trump. We need to stop relying on American vehicle companies. My hubby was a Ford man, but he's even willing to buy Chinese EVs instead. You got to have an open mind about this stuff, because I remember resentment about, to use my point from a few minutes ago, but I'm not buying any Japanese car. They're taking jobs away from us. Well, no, if you build the plant here, you're hiring Canadians, in that case, hiring Americans. So you're not doing that. You'd be surprised, in those days, I had friends and relatives actually down in the States, and I was surprised to go down there and see they're driving Toyotas and Hondas because they were being manufactured in America. And they got no problem with it then. That's, I think, a way to build a bridge between the two countries, economically anyway. Hi, Kelly. Kelly Media says, hey, Chantel wants you to comment on if the UK is about to betray NATO. I don't know what's going on with their prime minister. The guy doesn't impress me a whole lot. You'd like to think in difficult times, and God knows we're in difficult times, you got a leader with backbone, a Churchill, something like that. And he doesn't impress me that way at all. He seems to vacillate an awful lot because I think he's intimidated by Trump and doesn't quite know how to respond to that. And that's not the kind of leadership that NATO needs, and certainly not the kind of leadership that we're looking for from our quote unquote partners in NATO and economically at the same time. So let's follow that closely and see what's going on. When the going gets tough, the tough get going. I got all the cliches if you want to roll those in here. Alan Gander says, if we allow China to build anything, it needs to be monitored. Sure it does. And that was my point, Alan, that go into this with your eyes wide open. You set some guardrails for this. This is how it's going to be done. This is what we expect. And this is what we're going to give you in return. It's called negotiation. And we're not used to that because the clown down in the White House doesn't believe in negotiation. He believes in just issuing demands. But these things are arrived at by finding some consensus, and it's give and take. And the Chinese have done that before. They do make deals. Now, we can argue how well they keep up with those deals, and are they trying to go in the side door on some issues? But that's how you monitor. You're absolutely right, to make sure that sort of thing isn't happening. And It's all a matter of saying let's set some rules in place here. And if there's, as I say, two willing parties, it could happen. Mo Coffee says, "Hey, I cannot afford a vehicle in support. High prices threatening rural populations." Okay, the North American vehicles, and Mo, you make a very valid point about this, which is one of the reasons why, like I say, back in the '80s, the Chinese or the Japanese vehicles started to come over here because we couldn't afford the North American brands. But even now, I know that Chevy and Ford and everybody else are building EVs and or hybrids, whatever the case might be, but they're still too expensive. It costs an awful lot of money. We're told that these Chinese EVs are a lot less expensive, and you know that's going to open the market up. Violet, hey, good to have you with us. Violet says that's easy. We have plenty of engineers who travel overseas to monitor that work. Yeah, but I'd still like to see them monitoring it over here. I know that the lion's share of the work may still be done in the mainland, but plant your flag over here. Hire Canadians to do the work. That would assuage an awful lot of concerns, and at the same time, increase our economy. And that's kind of the deal that we're being proposed from the Swedish folks about the jets too, aren't we? Hi, Stefan says BYD has a 45,000 square foot factory in Newmarket, Ontario. A few years ago, they wanted to expand it for making cars and battery factory to complement it. Doug Ford chased them away on the rails. Ford has sung from about 5 different song sheets when it comes to EVs. Do you remember when he first got elected? Seems forever ago now. First thing he did was say no more subsidies, and he tore out all the charging stations, the EV charging stations that the previous government had put in, and basically declared war on EVs. Until finally somebody said, like, you know what, there's money in those hills up in northern Ontario. You mine that stuff, you can make the batteries here. We're going to employ Canadians. So he's changed his tune on that, but I still don't think he's sold on this whole EV thing. To the extent that he should be as a leader. What we're looking for here for leaders is not just immediate decisions, but somebody with vision to say this is the way things should be, and that's where we want to go, and these are the steps we have to take to get there. I think Ford drops the ball a lot when it comes to that part of being a leader. Carmick Wren says, I love Maloney's comments regarding 45 saying NATO is nothing without America. Maloney says, cool, so we should shut down your bases, cut your trade, or just storm McDonald's. There's enough of those over there, too. McDonald's, that is. The Golden Arches are everywhere over there. That's a great question, and it's an interesting discussion to have as to what NATO would look like without the United States. There are ways to do this. It doesn't necessarily have to crumble. There could be a North Atlantic Alliance, which is what was named in the first place. So, Denmark, Norway, Sweden, Canada could have a role in that, certainly the UK, to still defend that area against Russian interference and Russian incursions and things of that nature. So, that's a discussion that could be had. Hi, Honey Badger. Good to have you with us today. Said, what are the details of Canada's EV Arrow 2? Would a deal with China help or hurt this project? We don't know yet. That's to be determined. Like I say, I'd like to say everything's on the table, but we don't quite know what's on the table. This initial discussion about what's going to be happening between our guys, and there's a huge trade delegation, Canadian delegation is over there, 4 or 5, I guess, ministers from the Carney government, and some other folks involved in industry, and Scott Moe, the Saskatchewan premier's there too. At least he said he was going to be there for the initial part of the trip, so clearly the canola issue is going to come up. And we'll see just what kind of resolution, if any, they're going to try to find with the canola situation. But as we said, it's very closely tied to what's going on with EVs. If there's some headway made on the EV situation with the Chinese, the tariffs with the Chinese EVs, there's a very good chance that that canola tariff situation, which has really crippled Saskatchewan particularly, might just go away. That would be nice. That's a great takeaway from those negotiations, if in fact they can make that happen. And again, I know the official word is, look, we're not guaranteeing anything's going to come out of this first meeting except some agreements to carry on. You got to lower that. If you're in government, you have to lower expectations. You don't want to say, hey, we're going to get this. You don't want to be like the guy in the White House. I'm going to do this on day one, and we're going to get this done. And then when you don't, you look like an idiot, like he's been looking over the last 9 months, I guess. Manage your expectations. And then if something does come of it, sooner than later, well, that's a bonus. Yeah, we got things done. It's very difficult. I mean, getting involved in this, and don't forget, we're dealing with China, and we have some reservations about China. Need we go into that list again about political interference, about spying, about industrial espionage? There's a lot of stuff going on there, And at no point has the Chinese government said, hey, you know what, we'll clean up our act. Human rights is a major issue and has been between Canada and China for quite some time. It was a major roadblock. Remember when Stephen Harper first became prime minister back in 2006? He was pretty cool to any kind of a relationship with China because he had a real problem, and I think justifiably so, about human rights. We talked about the Uyghurs and the persecution by the Chinese government of the Uyghurs and so many others. And Harper just kind of said, well, give these guys the cold shoulder. Now, that changed in Harper's government about 2 years later when we went into that deep recession and Canada was in economic woes like the rest of the world was. And all of a sudden, China looked like a pretty good bet to start trading with. And Harper eventually saw the light, and so did others. And Jean Chrétien, of course, before him. Trudeau is kind of a mixed bag about his relationships with China. And now we're into a situation where the Prime Minister, Mark Carney, understands that it's something that has to happen. It's one of these things that you've got to be don't just push everything aside and say don't worry about that. That's not important. All that stuff's important, but at the same time, so is our economic situation and our trade. And I referenced and that's one of these things that the Prime Minister's got in the back of his mind. Chantel, thank you for being with us. Good to have you on the channel. Somebody. A paid member who's jumped in here. Thank you, by the way, for the folks that are tipping. Sorry I kept reading stuff and off on a tangent and stuff like that, but we greatly appreciate your support, and we talk about that on every one of our podcasts, about your support through subscriptions and through tips to try to help us to do the work that we're doing here too. It's so essential, and it's gratifying to see the kind of support that we get from you and from everyone else. Sandra, another one. Hey, good to have you with us, Sandra. Doug Ford is short-sighted. He is only interested in votes that are available by the auto workers and the unions. Well, yeah, I'm getting a little tired of these photo ops with all the people with the construction jackets and the hard hats in the background. Highway says, hey, Donald, this is Mark. I'm in China right now. You said you're not interested in a trade deal anymore. Can you tell me if that's true? Because the Chinese are offering us a deal. I don't know if that's the way the conversation's going to go, but I think that's the message that we're sending, as subtle as it might be, that there are other options. And by the way, we mentioned this, I think, in yesterday's podcast. If we do get a deal, and if we can hammer something out between the Chinese government and Canadian government vis-a-vis the economy with EVs and trade and steel, there's a lot on the plate here. You know there's going to be a pushback from Trump. We'll talk about that in a second. Hi, Lightning Rod. Good to have you with us. Hell, Bill Kelly, for providing this forum for Canadians to share their views with your channel. We do this every week. We kind of promised you this, I guess, at the beginning of the year. We did these live casts intermittently, and we had so much response to it. And even after we finish off with the podcast, people saying, hey, when are we going to do this again? So this is the night. Usually it's going to be Wednesday night. Now, that may vary because of circumstances from time to time, but we kind of like this 6 p.m. Eastern time on Wednesday night to do the live cast. So if this is the first time you're with us, great to have you with us. Mark it on your calendar and your sheets that this is where you can actually access us with the live stream. And, of course, on our channel for all the other podcasts that we do through the week, too. But thank you for the heads up and for the good words there. We really do appreciate that. Now, I mentioned, as we always do with the live stream, that we're going to talk about the China trip, but anything else you want to bring up about the jet purchases or anything else, throw that in there too. Ron, Carney was invited. I think that speaks volumes. Yeah, these guys met, I think, in a couple of different times. I know they talked at the United Nations when Carney was there for the opening in September for that session, but they have had conversations in the past. And this kind of goes back to what we've talked about on the podcast. Carney is known and Carney is respected globally. They know this guy, not just because he was the governor of the Bank of Canada and the governor of the Bank of England, but he's been involved with the G7, he's been involved with NATO, he's been involved with a number of international organizations, and he's rubbed shoulders with all these people, and they like him. We've talked about the circumstance that there are so many people globally when he goes to these meetings. It was the same way when he was in South Africa a few weeks ago for the G20. People are lining up from other countries. Can we talk to the Prime Minister for a few minutes? I want to get his views on this or that or whatever. Yahweh says, hey, don't worry about Carney coming back empty-handed or not. Regardless what happens, conservatives are going to complain. Yeah, if he comes back with a big birthday cake, they'll complain. Well, that's Poilievre's way. The glass is not half empty or half full. He doesn't even believe there's a glass there. This is a guy who's doing what he's supposed to be doing. And all this time, Poilievre complaining that, whoa, he's off on day on all these trips. That's what they're supposed to do. How do you think you broaden your horizons? How do you think that you try to find different avenues for trade and you diversify your trade? You don't do that by sitting in your corner office. You get out there and you glad hand, you make deals, you talk to people. That's what Mark Carney's doing. That's what our leaders should be doing. And hopefully it's paying off. And we're starting to see, I think, some positive vibes about that in the last couple of weeks with some upticks. There's still a long way to go. And nobody's, telling it, hey, the work is done. A lot of work to do yet. Alan Ganner says, hey, Bill, you are my favorite Canadian content. Well, thank you. You come with receipts. You cover things important to me. I also gravitate towards your guests, one such as Markham Hislop, and I subscribe to his channel. Yeah, we had Markham on the podcast yesterday. As a matter of fact, I think that one just dropped earlier today. And it's worth a listen. There's a lot of good stuff that Markham talked about the Venezuelan oil situation and the impact that's going to have not just on the States, but on Canada. And it's a different perspective, as Markham often gives us. And it's well worth watching that one when you get some time, maybe later on tonight after we're finished doing this. Digital Island Boy, good to have you here with us on the livecast. Carney is doing the right thing. Trump is literally trying to sandbag the Canadian economy so it'll collapse and you'll have little resistance. I think that's the end game. This whole thing about 51st state, I don't necessarily think that the Army's going to be lined up at the 49th parallel on the border here. They're going to try to kill us economically and then just walk in and say, hey, we'll save your butt. And that's our job, and that's the Prime Minister's job, to make sure we don't get to that point. Hey, Sally Feschuk, good to have you with us here. Heard that 5 NATO nations, including Canada, deployed to Greenland today. Not good. Well, there has to be a show of support. I mean, you don't just send communiques and say, hey, we got your back. At some point, there's got to be a show, not necessarily of strength, but to say, hey, this is a NATO country. This is a NATO member. Do you really want to do this? Do you really want to challenge NATO and challenge their charter? And I don't think the crazy guy in the White House would respond one way or another, but some people hopefully can whisper in your ear and said, maybe it's time to just dial it down a little bit. Hi, Lurkin. Good to have you with us on the podcast and on the live cast here today. Your comments are always welcome to find out exactly how you're feeling about the issues that are coming up here. And like I say, it's not going to just be about the trade issue with Japan. I'm interested in your thoughts about the jet issue, too, that we might get to a little bit later on. Oh, the Lurkin does. We need to buy those Gripen jets yesterday. Send troops to Greenland now. Time is of the essence. Yeah, I've had some pretty strong thoughts about that, Lurkin. Thank you for picking that up. And I know that I've taken some heat. Some of you have disagreed with my idea that I think that, as Lucan does, that the Gripens are the best way to go. I don't trust Donald Trump. And what bothers me about the F-35, the Americans, and I know we've already ordered some of them, is it's not even about the efficacy of the jet itself. It's I don't trust him. He controls the software for the jet and the parts. And this guy could just say, you're not getting them anymore. Or, hey, I'm going to cancel the software so you can't even fly those things. And he would do that. And I don't want to be beholden to him, and I don't want him to have that kind of a stranglehold on our Canadian military. Kujak says you had a professor on the podcast the other day who was basically telling us to bend to Trump. Why would you have him on? Well, I believe you're talking, about the show that we did a couple of days ago. Christian Luprecht from Royal Military College. I don't know if he was saying bend to Trump, but he was suggesting basically that what he was looking at was the technical aspects of this jet versus that jet, and we need to go with the American F-35. And this guy's an expert. I've known him for many, many years. Used to have him on the radio show on a pretty regular basis talking about issues like this. And I respect his opinion, but I don't know that he gave full weight to some of the problems that could arise because of that. And we don't give in to Donald Trump, but we don't bend knees to Donald Trump. And to do that militarily, I think, would be a huge, huge mistake. The problem we've had for years now is that we've been beholden to the United States for our defense, whether it's NORAD, whether it's NATO, any other thing. And we can't do that anymore. At some point, you got to cut the umbilical cord. And I think if we bring in the F-35s and simply say, yeah, we'll do whatever the States wants, they've still got us under their thumb. And that's, I think, a big mistake. Gracie says Trump would use the F-35s as an extortion tactic for anything he wanted. You're right. Absolutely. That's my point. I think a lot of people are starting to see that. And 10 years ago, you'd say, oh, the Americans would never do that. I wouldn't put anything past Trump these days to try to basically, to use your point, extort us, because he's tried to do it. He's trying to do it now. And playing into his hands like that by saying, let's make the American purchase, I think would be huge, huge, because essentially we'd be asking his permission to fly the jets because they control the software. It's not a matter of like it was 40 years ago where you just hop in there and, crank it up and take off. Everything is dependent upon jets and computers and interfaces and by the way, the Gripen does interface with the F-35s because some NATO countries are using the Gripen already, and they're doing just fine in the maneuvers in which they're engaged. Yahweh, good to have you with us here today. Everybody needs to remember that we've already bought and paid for 16 of those F-35s. I believe this means we need to buy maybe another 16 and then have a mixed fleet by adding it to the Gripen. I don't know. We're not getting a definitive word on that, Yahweh, about where the government's going to respond. They could simply say the ones that are already ordered, that's all. The rest of them we're going to get someplace else. I don't know. It's an important decision, and I'd like to find out sooner than later, but let's make the right decision. Malcolm says, buying the Gripen is more than acquiring a jet. We get to work with Saab on designing the replacement. And to your point, Malcolm, they say if we order, I think it's 25 or 35, whatever the number is, they'll build them here in Canada. They'll build the plant here. So we'll be building them, hiring Canadians to do that. And all of a sudden we've got an industry and an economic upswing because of that. And, and I think it sounds like a big, they're throwing some drones too. I mean, there's a lot going on here. And that's the sort of relationship I think you're looking for here. Yes, the purchase of the jets themselves, but if we can have an economic benefit from that, that's a win-win situation, I would think. James Beckett, Mystical, says, what a Canadian adventure, eh? When's the last time you felt so alive? Sure, there may be some storms, but we are Fort Canada strong. Pierre Poilievre is an American zombie. Thank you for that observation. I think my comments and my thoughts about Mr. Poilievre, I think, are well stated and well documented these days. Heaven help us if this guy ever gets into power. It just continues to just amaze us with the naivety that he comes out with time and time again. And we talk about his team and the Maple Mega crew. It's frightening, isn't it? Digital Island Boy says China's BYD changed the government-owned Barbados Transport Board from diesel buses to battery-powered electrical buses, saved Barbados tons of money on fuel imports. China, we're told, and we've talked about this on the podcast, are leaps and bounds ahead of the rest of the world, certainly ahead of North America when it comes to electrification of transportation. We could learn a few things from them if we're going to develop that relationship between the two governments. And again, we go in with eyes wide open. I get all that, and I think we can repeat that as often as we want. But the Prime Minister is aware of that. There's nobody naive. I don't think anybody's walking in there thinking everything's going to be roses when we're finished. But we can learn from the Chinese, and we can benefit from that relationship with the Chinese. And Trump's got his own problems with China. He's got his own reasons, if in fact the guy even knows how to reason. Mike DeShane, hey, Mike, good to have you with us. I'd hope that if we do go with the Gripen and begin to build them here, that we Canadian engineers could be involved in updating and redesigning it to fit better our specific needs. I'd like to think, Mike, and I guess we're getting into the realm of, well, maybe or what if, that there would be that dialogue because we're building a relationship with Saab at that point. Because Saab is investing in Canada if they're going to, reach that quota and they're going to start building them here. I would think there's going to be some back and forth about what would be best for here. But these guys are doing a pretty good job. They seem to know what they're doing already. Elena Benoit-Was, we need to work with Ukraine. They've come a long way in developing their own ordinances, and weapons developing are accelerating. That's one of my major concerns, Elena. But we seem to have pushed Ukraine to the side because of all this other stuff that's going on, and we can't do that. It's a brave country making an incredible attempt to try to defend their own sovereignty, and America's turned their back on them. Trump certainly has, and even some of the supporters they used to have in the Senate and the Congress, because they want to, kiss Trump's boots, have decided to turn their backs on Ukraine. Canada can't afford to do that, and I don't think they will do that. Lightning Rod says, hey, do you think that McCartney will try and sell some oil contracts to China? I don't know. McCartney, I don't know what's going to happen. China always gets already a lot of oil, from Venezuela. And I know that Trump would like to say that, I'm going to block that. I'm going to try to really hurt the Chinese. There are ways. There are backdoor ways that they can do this. They can buy it from other places. And don't forget, look at the map sometime. I don't know if Trump even knows what a map is. China could simply turn to the Middle East and the Saudis and get their oil from there. It's not that far, and transportation costs are relatively cheap in that part of the world. So every time Trump thinks he's got somebody over a barrel, an oil barrel in this case, it ain't necessarily so. Hi, Live. Reichel says Ukraine is the central army right now for Europe. It's it's one of these things where it's as you said, what's going on there is going to be so pivotal to what's going to happen in Europe and Eastern Europe. The domino theory that there was Crimea and now there's Ukraine and what's going to be next. Putin's not going to stop. Just and Trump's doing the same mindset with his idiotic Monroe Doctrine formula that he wants to have domain over all of the Western Hemisphere. It's pretty scary what's happening, and we can't just ignore that sort of stuff. Yahweh's back with us, says, hey, what's the current situation with steel and aluminum closures? I think it would be great if we could pipeline that to European producers of Ukraine military assistance. I still think, and this is only my perception from the stuff that we've heard and talked to some of the experts, I think a lot of the time what we'd like to do with Ukraine is still handcuffed by Trump and his influence over NATO, and because there are some people that do cave in. We just talked about the UK a few minutes ago, and some of the stuff that Starmer has said. Canada has been there. They've had Ukraine right from the back. They've had their back. There's more they can do and should do, but we've got to maintain and strengthen that relationship and help these guys to fight the good fight. De Pink Capitan says if Canada, Europe and China dumped American treasury bonds, would that not cripple the American economy if Trump tries anything with NATO? The short answer to that, yeah, it would. Because you may remember, I guess about 9 months ago, that happened. There was a quick run on treasury bonds because Trump was starting to act like an idiot. We had no idea it was going to get as bad as it did. It actually got worse. But they were scared for a few days there. They were very scared about what was happening to the bond market. And it did bother. I don't know if Trump was smart enough to understand that, but some of the powers that be in the economy down there and in government, they knew that they were on a precipice there. So, yeah, that's something that could happen. And, yeah, it would have an impact. Mayday says, in my opinion, the U.S. obsession with Greenland is not about minerals or national security. It's about expansion. By acquiring Greenland, the U.S. would surround Canada on 3 sides and block NATO. I think that's part of it. I still think the minerals are part of it. The defense aspect is part of it, although I'm still wrestling with that. Mayday, from coming to our defense, Canadians and the rest of our allies need to wake up before this happens. Because Trump keeps talking about defending the Arctic. But at the same time, he kisses Putin's, just about every time an opportunity gets. Is he his adversary, or is this guy, is he a Russian agent working in the White House? Sometimes it looks a lot more like that than it does to somebody who's trying to defend NATO and defend North America against Soviet and Russian aggression. And, we're getting mixed messages from what Trump's doing that. Lucio Feroz Crosby says Ukraine is being used as Putin's weapons testing field. Yeah, it's disgusting what's going on there militarily, and the Russians are just wearing them down, and we knew that inevitably that was going to be happening. And again, I think the whole aspect of the negotiations are such as they are, and the peace plans that, for instance, the one that Trump brought forward, which was essentially Putin's peace plan, giving up territory. You will never be allowed in NATO. Don't ever agree to that. Never agree to that. That, for the rest of your country's life, however long that might be, they're not going to be allowed to join NATO. What a crock that is. Where's the respect for sovereignty? Putin and Trump are working together, according to Dale McLaren. It sure looks like it sometimes, doesn't it? That there seems to be in cahoots about an awful lot of this stuff. And what bothered me is, you remember, I guess a month or so ago, when Zelensky and Trump met to talk about peace plans, Trump admitted the fact that, before the meeting, he called and had a long conversation with Putin on the phone. In other words, getting his marching orders, I guess, from his boss. Skurum says they describe himself as a mafia boss. He acts like it. He does. It's this coercion and these threats that he's always giving. That hey, you do this or else something bad's going to happen to you. Sandra Bush says Trump just announced that he wants Iceland now, too. Where's he going to stop? It's Greenland. It's going to be Iceland. It's going to be, well, he's already talked about Panama, hasn't he? Cuba is involved in the discussions now. Yahweh says, don't forget, it was just the last few days that Trump said America can't have Russia or China as a neighbor. Apparently, he's never heard of Alaska. Yeah, well, as I mentioned a few minutes ago, Yahweh, you look at a map, but I guess Trump doesn't read. He doesn't look at maps. He doesn't understand anything. Remember when Sarah Palin was running for vice president with John McCain? Remember that some of the crazy things she said? I can see Russia from my backyard. She was the governor of Alaska at the time, and she probably could. Yeah, they're already neighbors. But Trump just doesn't seem to get that. It's a lot of things he doesn't get, though, isn't it? Revolution Blue Sky says Trump is testing NATO resolve in Greenland, and that's, I think, part of the game here. Well, he's doing the same thing. Greenland is protected by 32 countries. If Trump takes it on, the U.S. is out of NATO. Greenland will then only have one country protecting it. And that's the concern. He's doing what Putin has done in Eastern Europe. He's going and pushing, whether it's Crimea or Ukraine, whatever else he's got next on his agenda, until somebody says no more. And it happened. We've seen this happen historically. Hitler did this in Europe, of course, in the late 1930s. And there was always, well, okay, but no more. You can have that, okay, but just no. And they keep going. They keep going. Trump's doing it. Putin's doing it. NATO's supposed to be able to stop that, or should be stopping that. They haven't been as effective as they could be or should be in that situation. Digital Lion Boy says you cannot rebuff USA without hitting the richest business leaders in their wallets. They are the ones who control the U.S. politicians. Anything the rich in the U.S. want, they get. Yeah, especially under this president, because he basically kowtows to them. They put him in there. They, paid billions of dollars to get him elected, and they did it so he would give them their money back, really, and that's what he seems to be doing. Hi, Nancy. Good to have you with us here. Do you think that PP could be in the Epstein files? If that's what he won't get a secretary clearance, I don't think so. That's never come up. I would be surprised if that were true. I think almost everybody else is probably in those Epstein files. But yeah, so I don't know if Poilievre. I think Poilievre has a lot of other issues, and I think as we talked about on the podcast, and this is something that I know we've had former members of CSIS on the program some time ago. Poilievre had some sort of an involvement with the Indian government and with other foreign governments to get the leadership in the first place. And there's some hint that perhaps some of those foreign governments were also players in the last federal election supporting Poilievre and his team. So I think that's one of the reasons. And again, that's all speculative because we don't know what CSIS or the RCMP are investigating. And Poilievre certainly isn't going to tell us, is he? So it's a real problem. But again, I'm one of these people that, like you, I'm suspicious. Why don't you want to have a security check? What are you trying to hide? Violet Storm says, not for long. I feel like the populace is going to rise up pretty soon. Do you? Really? You know what bothers me? We saw the tragedy, the murder of that lady in Minnesota, just about a week ago now. And everybody's seen the video. And the White House immediately spun it and said that, she's a white terrorist, a subversive group and all this sort of crap. There was a survey that was released just yesterday, a national survey, an opinion poll. Do you think that officer should be charged because of what he did? 54% said yes. 54. It should have been 95%. Only 50. That means half of Americans believe the crap that Trump is spewing about what happened, even though they saw what happened. They saw, they're still spewing the story. The story today, CBS News, which used to be a reputable source until they got bought up by MAGA, they reported the other day that the guy, that idiot that murdered that lady, suffered internal bleeding and is suffering from bullshit. He didn't even get hit. That car was nowhere near him. She backed up and turned the wheel, yet they're still maintaining that he got hit by the car and run over. And yeah, Renee Good, of course, who died in that situation, was not a terrorist. She did not run the car at anybody. Everything, the narrative that the White House has been spewing here is just plain false. And people, this is one of the things I referenced, and I know it sounds like we're getting into conspiracy theories, but it's not a conspiracy when it's happening in front of your eyes. It's like quoting from 1984. The first thing they tell you is don't believe what you hear, don't believe what you see, just believe what I tell you. And there are so many people that are so thick in the head, maybe they got their MAGA hats on too tight, that do just that. They don't believe their eyes. They don't believe what they hear. They simply believe what their leader, their fearless leader, their cult leader in the White House tells them to believe. Chantel, hey, good to have you back with us. I don't think that survey is accurate. They're probably rigging it. Could be, because there's been a real move by MAGA over the last little while to take over control of the quote-unquote traditional media. But they just bought CBS, of course. Fox News is really their propaganda machine. News Nation, same way. They bought a whole bunch of newspapers. Bezos has the Washington Post now. The editorials are totally different now. They're controlling the message, and that's pretty scary. Tyson Watts says a bruise is considered internal bleeding. I don't know how he got bruised. What did he do? Hurt his trigger finger when he shot her 3 times? Is that how he got the bruise? Because it had nothing to do with the car. And have you noticed, by the way, without getting too deeply into that, he fired 3 shots. One of them, and then 2 into the window, the side window. The one that was fired from the front was from the side. I mean, you can see the bullet hole in the windshield. It was not from in front of the car. That car was never anywhere near him. He backed away from the car and shot her 3 times in the head. Nancy Daigle says, are there any new stations in Canada that are worth watching because they all seem off? I don't know if there's any new stations at all. CBC, I don't know what's going on with them these days. They seem to be kissing Poilievre's butt just about every chance they get. CTV, well, there's a right-wing bent to the media here in this country. That's why I find it laughable, always have, when they say the left-wing media. That's something that Poilievre and Andrew Scheer and all these other people want you to believe. But the reality is all of these media outlets are owned by conservatives and right-wing conservative groups in many cases. The National Post and the Toronto Sun, those Sun newspaper chains, are actually owned by a U.S. consortium that's run by MAGA. So don't give me this crap that it's the left-wing media that's giving the message out here. It's quite the opposite in this country. But that's what they call transference. To get people off the scent, you'd say they're the ones that are doing it. Trump does this all the time, and some of the right-wingers in this country, the Maple MAGA people, are doing the same thing. You blame somebody else for what it is that you're doing, and they know from past experience there's always going to be somebody that buys into it. They said it's true, so I guess it's true. Elena, good to have you here. Says only problem with the online is that Trump can flip off that switch. Yeah, and that's the concern. If he doesn't want Canadian jets to fly, those F-35s, if we buy those, he can just say no. He can turn them off, and they're going to sit on the ground. So, and that happens. And listen, you know the control that Elon Musk and some of his friends have over what's going on the internet. And it's not just with X or Twitter, whatever you want to call that. They control many of the other outlets, and they influence these other outlets, whether it's Zuckerberg. These are all guys in the Trump campaign and all in the Trump camp. And they are manipulating, sometimes subtly, sometimes not so subtle, an awful lot of what goes on social media. There are filters that go on that they will impose. If they don't like something that's going on, or they don't like there's a message or a trend, you notice all of a sudden it disappears. Well, that's not you and me doing it. There's still somebody else pulling the levers here. And if that sounds big brotherish, it's because it is. And we're living it now. And that's one of the things that I think we got to just wipe the naivety away and just starting to deal with the realities that those people, they're bad people, they have bad intentions, and they are manipulating the system. And it goes to, Putin said this years ago, and he's not the first communist, he's not a communist, but anyway, Putin simply said, I can take over America without firing a shot because you do it from within. And well, that's what he's done. He's got his agent in the White House now, and he's got people like Bezos and Zuckerberg and all these other folks controlling an awful lot of the social media and internet activity. He's controlling the message, and once you do that, the propaganda spews like a broken sewer main, and people just lap it up because they see it on social media and it's got to be true. I saw it on that site. Anyway, but it's one of the frustrations that I feel about this. Quick note to Thomas. Thank you for your tip. Great to have you on the podcast, and thanks for your support. Yeah, and Thomas says we shouldn't be taking the bait and we should be talking about Canada, and we do. But, we can't be oblivious to what's going on south of the border because heaven knows it's having an impact. But thank you again, Thomas, for your support. We really do believe that we need to get this message across and speak truth here. And your support really helps us to do that. Hey, Violet, hey, Bill, do we have Palantir contracts anywhere in Canada? They're frightening. The IF contract that we got, I don't quite know exactly. Yeah. Well, if you're talking about the Gardo contract and the security courses, that's a Montreal firm that was hired to look after Yeah, alligator Alcatraz. The ones that we just remember, the people that were just pulled off the streets and all of a sudden thrown in prison. Uh, yeah, the land of the free, my ass. Okay, that's the way the states are these days. We talked about that on the podcast, and a Canadian firm. You can say no. I don't give a damn if there's a lot of money involved. You can say no and say I don't want to get involved in that. Money talks in so many different ways here, though, and people have scruples until somebody waves a dollar in front of them. Honey Badger says Americans are not irreparably divided. Trump has driven that, whereas what's there in Canada, I feel that he's helped unite us. Well, he has. Canada is showing strength, and the Americans are showing weakness. I know your point, Honey Badger, that I know that there are an awful lot of Americans that are disgusted about what's going on, but what are you going to do about it? I don't want to be dismissive and just wash my hands of what's going on there because I'm not going to paint everybody with the same brush, but you guys got yourself into this mess. You're going to have to get yourselves out of it. And I don't know how. I don't have the solution. I'm not suggesting armed insurrection. That's their game. But, if you think you're going to win it at the ballot box, that's a pretty huge uphill climb to try to make at this point. Ivan Jardine says, what about the CRTC rules about biased reporting and our Canadian media complying? I could give you scripture and verse for the next 3 hours about the efficacy of the Canadian Radio and Television Commission when it comes to this, about the granting of licenses. There are rules and regulations, and those must be adhered to unless there's a special circumstance, which is just about anything that the big three want. The Bell Media and the other three that are running enough, well, basically all the electronic media these days, they just go in there and cry poor, and they pretty much get dispensation to do pretty much what they want. And that's the sad reality about what's going on with media these days. Digital Boy says, CBS yanking the news story in the USA to benefit the White House. That's happening on a regular basis now. It's not just about what was going on with the El Salvador prison. There have been a couple of other instances where CBS has basically told us that they've made the decision at the last minute not to run those sorts of stories, and it's turned into an arm of the Trump White House, and again they're right there with Fox News and News Nation. It's all about ratings, and the people that own it, that own CBS and Paramount now, are people that are Trump advocates. So that filter is right there, and everything that's going to be said on that newscast. They got a new anchor right now who's blowing it. I think they've lost 35% of their audience in the first 10 days since this guy's taken over. It's not all his fault, but he's clearly, from what he's been saying on the air, he's simply singing from the song sheet that his owners tell him to sing, which is in turn coming from the White House. It's not the way news is supposed to be. And Fox News, we expect that from, sadly, even though they've been fined dozens of times. Fox News to be cut off the Canadian cable now. Robert, you're absolutely right. You know what? You can say no. It's an option. I don't know where it is in your district, but for our place, I just don't want it. I don't want it on our television. I don't watch it. I don't want to hear what they've got to say. It's crap. There's hardly even a foundation of truth to anything they say. They're just a bunch of cheerleaders for Donald Trump. And yeah, they're having a huge influence, but don't watch it. Turn it off. Just tell the cable company, forget about it, block it. Digital Island Boy says Fox News lacks critical thinking skills. From the time that they say the American public want or don't want, beware propaganda without source or reference is coming next. And that's a good point. The story that we ran about the shooter, the murderer that killed the lady in Minnesota, that he suffered internal bleeding, unattributed. Didn't mention it. There was no record of, hey, here are the records. He was in the hospital he was treated, but none of that. They just put it out there. And that's what people at Fox News and News Nation and now CBS are doing on a pretty regular basis. It's disgusting. But just as we've talked about, governments need to be aware of things and they have to go in with their eyes wide open. So do we as the public. There's so many options right now for information or disinformation, as the case might be, because of the internet, because of all the options that we've got here. But go in with your eyes wide open and don't just say, well, I read it there, so it must be true. The Pink Captain says, my girlfriend is American and she wants out. She looks at us like how the world should be. A lot of people are doing that. I've heard that comment, and thanks for jumping in on this. A lot of people from different parts of the world are looking to Canada right now because of this, well, our proximity to the United States, certainly, and the fact that a lot of the crap that Trump is doing and his staff are doing is going to have a direct impact on us. And they're watching to see, okay, how's Canada going to handle that? and watching and learning. We right now have eyes on us to see how we're going to treat what's going on with Trump and the White House, and whether it's trade, whether it's the military, whatever the case might be. I think our prime minister is up to the challenge. But that sounds like a cheap phrase, but it's true. The whole world is watching. News Troll says, if Renee Goods, I'm going to put that one up again in just a second, because I want to get into that point. If Renee Goods' shooting was self-defense, imagine if Capitol Police defended themselves on January the 6th. Wouldn't that have been great? Would have saved on the corrupt pardons. Just saying. Christy, what's her name? Christy Nome was on one of the news shows. I think it was Dana Bash on CNN over the weekend. And she asked her that question. Showed the insurrection on January the 6th and said, should those police officers have fired? No, they would have been arrested. So, you can shoot and you can beat the crap out of police officers as long as you're a Trumper. That's okay. That's free. You can shoot them in the face 3 times and get away with it. But if you're against Trump, if you're against the MAGA people, that's a different set of rules altogether. That's pretty frightening too. And that's what, the home of the brave and the land of the free is devolved into these days. And it's really tragic. And I hear some voices that are still complaining about this, and it can't be that way, and this is not America. Well, it is sort of America these days. Thank you, Thomas. Another tip. Thank you for your tip, and thank you. I just got to jump off right now, and so do we in just a couple of minutes. But it's been great to get this feedback, and I really enjoy doing this every Wednesday night here with our live stream to get your direct impact on what we've been talking about and the information that or disinformation that we're talking about these days. And it's Lightspeed Tractor says because at least a lot of this is less horribly random. There's a lot going on here right now. Christy Nome also said that ICE is there to protect the public from sexual predators. That's a load of crap. And don't believe anything that they say. Whether it's her or it's Bondi, the so-called Attorney General. They're all. This is tragic. What's happened to the United States government and to the administration, and the stranglehold that they have on what people consider to be the greatest democracy in the world. Any Name says the Green Line kerfuffle is a negotiation over A1 Data Freedom Center. AI, I'm sorry, AI. It sounded what's her name? Secretary McMahon is the Education Secretary who called it A1. A couple of months ago, because she's gone now because they abolished education portfolio in the States because they want people to be stupid. That's true. It's easier to handle a population if they're uninformed and ignorant about facts. So, do what you can, get rid of education, get rid of alternative options for people to learn things, control the message on all the media, which is what they're doing right now, and you get people following you like little puppy dogs. And that seems to be the intention of the Trump White House. And sadly, it seems to be working. Now, I see the numbers, his popularity is starting to decrease, but I'm waiting to see some results of that. That's a public opinion poll. There's got to be something a lot stronger than that to try to turn things around there. May says, I'm glad that we have Mark in charge rather than Trump cheerleader named Pierre. I do worry the misinformed are going to still be there, and they will be. There are still going to be people that think Poilievre's wonderful, and Andrew Scheer is wonderful, and the Maple MAGA folks that worship and adore Donald Trump, they think that too. The media is going to get Pierre elected, the misinformed media. I hope not. I hope not. We've got a vested interest in what's going on here, and we will do our best. And I know a lot of my fellow podcasters are of the same mind, that we've got to be very, very disciplined about this and get the message out there and create the lines of communication. I mentioned the first podcast we ever did, which seems like a long, long time ago now. And I'll restate it here just as we're going to finish off the session here tonight. It's never my intention when I do a podcast to get you to change your mind on something. What I'm trying to do, and I hope I can do, is get you to think and to open your mind up to other possibilities and other opinions about things. And that's, I think, the important thing that we seem to have lost these days. It's easy to read an article and say, well, I guess that's what's going on in the world because that's the article that I read. You got to be more. And yeah, as Violet just said, Violet, your comment here is the one we're going to finish off with tonight. Trump said, and he said this 100 times, it's a very damning comment. Trump says, smart people hate me. Why do they hate you? Because they're smart and you're not. That's really what it comes down to. Empty Nest says, keep calm and Carney on. He's smarter than all of them combined. And on that note, we're going to wrap it up. It's been a blast. We'll do this if this is your first time on. Thank you for being with us, and thank you for the folks that have tipped us. We really do appreciate your support, and for those that are subscribing, always great to have that kind of support for us to continue to do this work. And please like us, okay? Hit the like button and pass this on to other folks. And we'll do this again next Wednesday, as we do 6 o'clock Eastern time every Wednesday, and open it up for the live stream. And of course, lots more podcasts coming up. Boy, there's a lot going on. There would be days back in the days when I was doing radio. Frankly, it's a 3-hour show that we did every morning from 9 till noon. And there were some slow news days, especially this time of year, when the parliamentarians wouldn't be at work and there wasn't much going on. And we'd say, how are we going to fill 3 hours? What are we going to talk about? We're putting the podcast together on a daily basis right now. And we've got to say, well, I haven't got time for that. We'll have to do that when there's so much on our plate these days. But we will continue. We will persevere, and we will bring you these stories. And certainly we'll give you the opportunity, as we always do on the podcast, to respond either through our live streams or, of course, your response to the podcast that we do drop. Dale McLaren says, thank you kindly, Bill and Madeline. Everybody take care. Well, right back at you. Thank you to everybody for being with us here on the live stream today. That's it for this edition of our live stream podcast. And again, please share your thoughts and your likes with others. And thank you for all of those who are subscribing and all you or showing your support for us over the last couple of months, especially with all the stuff that's going on. Our thanks, as always, to Madeline Kelly, who does an incredible job putting the podcast together each and every day. Thank you again, Madeline. Until next time, I'm Bill Kelly. Stay in touch and stay informed.